Well,
Welcome, everybody, to Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick. I'm Rick, and this is my co-host, Emily.
hello, and for those of you watching, we have our little furry friend Java that decided to pop in for just a minute.
Not sure how long she'll stay here because she's already
A
getting
little
antsy. So
antsy.
thanks a lot, Java, for making a cameo appearance. Well, Happy New Year, everybody. And we are into season number 2.
Wow.
Can you believe that, Emily? It's been a year, and this is episode number 1. And we are going to be talking about our mission and purpose as a reminder. And if you're a first-time listener, you'll be able to hear why we are doing this. Emily and I talk about everything related to leadership, and you don't have to be a firefighter to listen to this. As a matter of fact, I know that we have people who listen to our podcast that are not firefighters.
And
One thing,
I'm not a
oh,
firefighter.
you're absolutely, yeah, you're not a firefighter. So yes, my co-host, is not a firefighter. Also, Emily and I approach our leadership philosophy from a biblical worldview. So, as I mentioned, we are going to talk about our mission and our purpose, and we're going to recap some of the episodes from 2024. And towards the end of the podcast, I have some statistics from Buzzsprout for this year that I want to share with everybody. So it's 2025,
Wow.
Emily. And let's talk about your background a little bit. Tell us about what you did in human resources and in your business as well.
Yeah, so I have a background in human resources. I was the executive assistant to the chief human resources director. So I ran a lot of her stuff. I was in the manager meetings and all of that. So I got a pretty good taste of HR in general. And then now I own my own business that I run with my mom. It's a cake pop business. And for those of you that don't know what a cake pop is, it's a cake and icing mixed together, rolled into a ball, and then dipped in chocolate. And it is like the most tasty
Yes.
morsel that
Yes,
you can have.
they are absolutely tasty. And tell our listeners too, Emily, because a lot of cake pops that people buy are just loaded with sugar. Tell our listeners how you approach that.
Yeah, so we flavor is our main like priority. So we make everything from scratch, and I cut the sugar in both the cake and the icing. And each cake has its own customized icing paired with the cake. So like we have a snickerdoodle cake, for instance, and it's a snickerdoodle cake paired with a brown sugar buttercream icing. So it makes it just for a really unique,
Yes.
scrumptious bite of flavor.
What's the most popular flavor that people buy?
Snickerdoodle.
Snickerdoodle. People like
Yep.
people like the snickerdoodle.
Yeah.
How did you get started with this?
Oh, well, you should know it. It started by accident. I was actually making Dad's birthday cake. I was getting into cake decorating and cupcakes, and so I offered to make his birthday cake one year, and it sunk in the oven. Like the middle completely sunk, like it was a crater. I don't know if you remember that.
Well, I do remember.
And
Yeah.
I couldn't decorate it at all because a pile of icing wouldn't even covered the hole in the middle. So we decided to just put it in the freezer because it was still a perfectly good cake. And I actually ended up making you another cake, and thankfully that one turned out for your birthday. And then the next day, my mom stumbled across an article on how to make cake pops. And we're like, oh, we have this cake in the freezer, so why not try? And so we tried it, and the first time was a complete, utter disaster. And I don't know, we just got the bug for it, and somehow we decided to just keep trying. And then my sister got a snickerdoodle cake for her birthday that year, and I've always loved snickerdoodle cookies, and I didn't know it was a cake flavor. So we decided to like look up a recipe, and we ended up like creating our own recipe and started just handing it out to friends and family, got orders, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Listen, folks, if you couldn't tell that Emily has a passion for doing cake pops, go back to the last 30 to 60 seconds and listen to the excitement in her voice. So, how does her business with cake pops relate to leadership? Well, watching Emily, listening to Emily deal with her customers, one of the top aspects is relationships. Do I
Mhm.
have that correct, Emily?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we really pride ourselves in our customer service and really, try to
Mhm.
prioritize our customers and have a good response
Mhm.
back and treat them with kindness. And yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and so that relates to another leadership topic that we have talked about last year more than one time, and we've interweaved it in several of our episodes, and that's communication.
Hmm.
Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, and then one other thing that I have seen Emily and my wife and her mom do that relates to leadership is planning. Emily, just hit a little bit about planning and the time that you spend. How much time do you spend planning with your business?
Quite a bit. I mean, we would go on like yearly retreats to plan out the whole year.
Mhm.
We haven't done that as much now because life is unpredictable.
Uh, mm,
But yeah, we try to plan ahead and think about new flavors that we can
mhm,
offer and seasonal flavors. And when we get orders, we plan that and strategy and yeah.
mhm. Yeah. So there you have that from Emily's perspective, folks. And because at the beginning, maybe some of you are wondering, well, how does her background relate to leadership? Well, first of all, coming, from that human resources background that Emily talked about, there was a
Hmm.
lot of opportunities there for leadership, within the city that Emily was working with. And then specifically with her business, we talked about relationship because listen, if we don't have relationships with people, then our leadership efforts are going to struggle or just possibly outright fail.
Yeah.
Same thing with the communications aspect. That's why we talked about communications quite a bit last year. And then the planning. Hey, listen, if we're not planning, I don't care what career that we are in. I mean, if we're not planning things out, there's going to be issues. So that ties in, from the leadership aspect. So from my background, I've been around the fire service since I was 3 years old. That's when I had my first ride on a fire engine. And a year after that, my dad gave me his badge from when he'd been a volunteer firefighter in New Jersey, where I grew up at. And that came about when there was a big fire in a small town called Fortescue down on the Delaware Bay. And you could hear the trucks coming from other towns. And so we would go out to the street, we being me and my dad, and watch the trucks go by. And, that's the days when firemen rode on the back step and we'd wave at them, they'd wave back. Then it was after that that my dad gave me his badge. When he was home and there was a fire, oftentimes we would go see what was going on. In other towns, we drive by the firehouses, and so I just had this constant exposure to the fire service. Plus, my Aunt Phyllis and Uncle Cliff lived next door to us, and she worked for a business in town called Danzenbaker, and she did their accounting, and it was a farm equipment, international farm equipment dealership. But one of the men she worked with, his name was Art French, or Frenchy is what he went by. And Frenchy was on the local fire company there in Cedarville, New Jersey. He would send home fire equipment catalogs to give to me, give them to Aunt Phyllis and have them pass on to me. And then between him and working with my Aunt Phyllis and Uncle Cliff, they get me down to the firehouse. I'd get on the rigs, and so that's my exposure. My dad had a bad heart, and unfortunately, when I was 14 years old, I came home from school and I found him dead on the floor from his fifth heart attack. And as the ambulance crew was from a neighboring town loaded him up, I'd already wanted to be a firefighter, but when that happened, that's why I vowed this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this as a career. And that was the same time period that Emergency, the television show, had come out about Johnny Gage and Roy DeSoto and Squad 51 working with Engine 51 in Los Angeles County. And then another that was very influential with me. And then another source of influence was a book called Report from Engine Company 82, written by Dennis Smith, who was a firefighter up there in the Bronx in FD and why. So I started hanging around the firehouse after my dad died. And when I turned 18, I joined the fire company there in Cedarville. And I also went into the delayed enlistment program in the Air Force. Wasn't able to get into the fire department initially with the Air Force, but there's a whole story with that. But I eventually did. And then I separated from the Air Force and worked at federal civil service for the Air Force. decided to go to college, ran out of money, and that's how I wound up in the Marine Corps as a firefighter. And then, well, I guess it was about a year after I was doing that, career planner came to me and said, "Hey, Davis, there's too many NCOs, which means non-commissioned officers for those of you who weren't in the military. Too many NCOs and crash crew. Pick another career field," which I picked three, but they put me in one that I did not pick, and that was aviation operations, which
Typical.
typical, yeah, typical. Fill out the dream sheet, which you're dreaming if you think you're going to get anything on the dream sheet.
That's why it's called that.
Yeah, that's why it's called that. But in the end, it was actually very beneficial for the remainder of my career because I learned a lot about admin functions and rules and regulations, how to research them. And one very critical aspect is the Marine Corps taught me how to type. And that played out going through the years. When I got out of the Marine Corps, that's when I came back out here to Colorado and got married to my wife. We've been married now over 37 years, and we have two daughters. One is Emily. Our other daughter is Rebecca. She's married to Nick. Nick's a career Air Force man and security forces. So after came out here, not too long, I was out here, and I joined the Loveland Fire Rescue Department. Spent 30 years, nearly 30 years with Loveland Fire Rescue, beginning as a volunteer firefighter, and then got hired a year later. And my last 15 years on the department was as a battalion chief. And I really enjoyed that. Most of that time was as a shift commander. I did have a 15-month stint as the training chief. Had great opportunities during my time in the fire department, led the hazardous materials team, the wildland firefighting program, special operations team, health and safety, the EMS program. So quite a few opportunities over the years. So now, folks, after I retired from Loveland Fire Rescue, my business is the Fire Officer Leadership Academy. And this is where I do coaching and mentoring to firefighters and leadership teaching. One of my hallmark classes is called The Art of Decision Making. And then another one that's coupled with that is situational awareness at the command level. Still teach hazardous materials, work with a gentleman named Brian Hines, his company's chemical safety training. And he also has another one called Hines Laboratories, which just recently, this past December 2024, was out in Riverside, California, doing a hazmat training with CAL FIRE Riverside, and then several other people from fire departments in the local area there. And I certainly don't want to forget the fact that I authored a book called The Furnace of Leadership Development, which has been a 2-time international bestseller. So,
and it's an audiobook too.
yes, yay, thanks for reminding me about that. Yes, folks, it's not only in print, but it is ebook and it is an audio book as well. And you can get that from Amazon. So, okay, Emily, what is next here that we want to talk about today?
Yeah, so those are probably wondering, where did the name Jersey Rick come from?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned here a minute ago when I was talking about my background, grew up in New Jersey and have visited several times, going back. I still have relatives, family members back in Jersey. So where did this name Jersey Rick come from? It's a nickname that was tagged when I was with Loveland Fire Rescue early on in my career. I believe, well, there was one other fellow that was on the fire department from New Jersey. He was from up further in northern New Jersey, where I grew up in southern New Jersey, down near the Delaware Bay. And, essentially, I would say because of, some of my mannerisms and being a straightforward, blunt individual, and when I tend to get fired up, my Jersey accent comes out a lot more.
Well, it comes out strong.
Yeah, it comes out strong. Yeah, and also when I get around people from Jersey or the Philadelphia area, because Cedarville is a lot closer to Philadelphia than it is New York. And so I just got tagged with Jersey Rick. So that's where that came from.
Well, it's catchy.
Yeah. So yeah, it is catchy. And that's where the name of this podcast comes from.
Yeah. Well, and the Firehouse talks came because when you were a battalion chief in the fire department, you were known to like go around each firehouse
Hmm.
and go and sit down with the guys and just talk with them about life, like all things either fire related or just their life in general, and just really
Yeah.
cultivate those relationships. And you would sit down with a cup of coffee. So that's where the firehouse talks part came
Right.
from.
And that ties in with, my purpose. And I love being around firefighters. I love talking to firefighters, working with firefighters. When was out in Riverside here this past December, we had 22 people in the group. And this particular week that we did was nothing but field exercises. We conducted 11 field exercises from Monday morning through Thursday night. So out of the 22 people, we had two that were with Riverside County Environmental Health, where those two folks are doing hazmat inspections, and they also respond to hazmat calls and are primarily serving as a technical reference. And then we had one fellow from the Ninth Civil Support Team. He was in the class, he was a captain. And for those who may not know, the Civil Support Team are staffed with Army Guard and Air Guard personnel, and it's referred to as AGR, Active Guard and Reserve. And they are tied in with different FEMA regions, and they provide response to terrorism, weapons of mass destruction exercises, and essentially they're loaded for bear. But that was the three out of the rest of the 19 raw firefighters.
Mhm.
And they just absolutely loved being around them, talking to them about their experiences, their background, their leadership experiences, and some of the things that they like, that they don't like about their particular fire departments. And yeah, that's what I would do as a battalion chief when I was with Loveland Fire Rescue. And back in April of 2015, the fire chief at that time here at Loveland, he wanted us being the command staff, the chiefs, to go through a day and a half class to determine our purpose. Well, at that point, I mean, I was in my 50s, so I already knew what my purpose was, but it was good because I was able to narrow it down into a very succinct sentence, which
Mhm.
is to impact others through teaching and leading. But yay, at the beginning, I said that Emily and I approach things from a biblical worldview. So, to impact others through teaching and leading, my marching orders come from the Bible in Luke chapter 12, verse 48, that says, "To whom much is given, much is required. To whom more is given, even more is required." Now, I'm a firm believer in duty. And God has allowed me to live several years past from when my dad died at his age. He was 41. And God has given me many opportunities, Emily. And so I want to share those experiences that I have
Yeah.
learned from over the years and also what I've picked up through training and education. So that's it a little bit there about your background and my background.
Yeah. And so our mission in this podcast is to develop and equip values-based leaders of strong character.
Yes, values-based leaders of strong character. So we use examples from current events, history, written materials, newspaper articles, newspaper off the online, I should say, and examples from my book, The Furnace of Leadership Development.
Yeah.
And, yeah, and certainly, from the Bible as well. Emily and I have studied different characters in the Bible, and there's quite a bit that we can glean from a leadership
Yeah.
perspective, certainly from the greatest leader of all time, which is Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And then we also use our personal examples as
Yes.
well.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Life life examples.
Yeah, life examples. Like,
Yeah.
most of you who are listening have had struggles in life. If you haven't, if you're a person who's never had any struggles, hey, go to the show notes and look up my email, send me an email and say, hey there, Rick, I've never had any struggles in life. What's that like? And then Emily and I will put together a special episode and we will discuss what it's like to have struggle.
Uh, yeah. So, who is this podcast for? Although the podcast has a fire department theme, kind of like what we've already touched on, any person who is a leader or who aspires to be a leader will benefit from the nuggets that we share.
Yeah.
And being a leader, like you don't have to be in a leadership or authoritative role in order to be a leader.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and we want to hit on that here in a minute. But I do want to add that the average length of our podcast is 30 minutes, and I know that for sure because I'm a guy that likes to dig into statistics. So I went through all 23 episodes that we did in 2024, and I averaged out the time frame. And to be specific, it's 30 minutes and 31 seconds. Yeah, because there's some podcasts out there. There's one that I listen to that I got to break it up because those two guys that are doing it, they're great. They know their subject matter and what they're talking about, but they can be an hour and a half, hour and 45
Ooh,
minutes. And so I have to
fun.
break that up. So
Yeah.
Emily, last year, episode 1, what did we talk about?
Yeah, in episode 1, we defined and talked about leadership. So we're going to ask the question, what is leadership?
What is leadership? Listen, people, there's a distinction between leadership and management, and I'll hit on that here momentarily. The author, John Maxwell, says leadership is influencing, nothing more and nothing less. And I'm also a member of the Maxwell Certified Leadership Team. I've been a part of that team ever since May of 2020, and great resources that I have coming out of that.
Yeah.
But another definition that I like about leadership comes from Lieutenant General John A. Lejeune, who was the 13th Commandant of the Marine Corps. There's a large base in North Carolina named after General Lejeune. And he said, quote, leadership is the sum of those qualities of intellect, human understanding, and moral character that enables a person to inspire and control a group of people successfully, unquote. So that people, I'm going to here momentarily talk about the differences between leadership and management.
Yeah, let's dive right into that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we can really define this very succinctly. Leadership is about people. And many times people interchange leadership and management. It's like, well, management, you know. Well, hey, in its purest sense, management is about resources, systems, and processes. You have people that are really good managers. They can manage IT systems very well. From a logistical standpoint, they can manage resources very well. And many times, because those type of people manage things and systems and processes very well, they wind up getting promoted. And then that's where they tank because they cannot lead people. Now, not always. I'm not going to be black and white and dogmatic to say that people who are good managers can't lead. That's not the case. But I can tell you, folks, after all the years that I spent between the Air Force, the Marine Corps, and in the fire service, I have seen that generally speaking, the people who are good at managing something are not good at leading people. And that's because they try to manage people and not lead them. So that's the major difference between leadership and management. So Emily, why don't we talk about some of the topics that we discussed in 2024 as we get close to winding down this episode?
Yeah, so some of the topics we talked about included integrity, trust, and credibility, clear communication,
Yes, clear.
why managing people is bad for morale.
Yes, and may I interject on that one?
Absolutely.
We dug into that and went into a deeper explanation between leadership and management and talked about why managing people was bad for morale.
Yeah, and it really touches on the difference between leadership and management, like we just talked about.
Yeah.
And then decision making.
Yeah, and we asked also, are you people who are in leadership or supervisory positions, are you developing people or are you creating a team of followers? You know, your kingdom builders. There's a difference between someone who is leading and that they are developing other leaders versus, the narcissistic jerk who's just wanting to, have a group of followers with them. And we also discussed last year let me try that again, the differences between development versus training. We
Mhm.
dug into 3 myths about leadership, which those were myth number 1 is your rank and or title make you a leader. That's not the case. Number 2, second myth is leadership is easy and anyone can do it. And the leadership is absolutely not easy. It's because you're working with people. And I'll quote John Maxwell. He
Yeah,
says, we are perfectly imperfect human beings. And when you're leading, you are dealing with people. And you're going to have issues.
yeah,
But it's rewarding. Let me add that, leading is rewarding. And then myth number 3 that we talked about is if you do not respect the person, then respect the rank and or the title. So we don't have the time to go back into that. Perhaps later on in 2025, we might revisit some of these things. So Emily, what are some of those other topics that we hit this past year?
yeah. Another topic was mentoring, and I'd like to add that what's it called? That dual footprints
Yes, dual
ebook
footprints.
that you have to offer.
Yes.
Um, they can just email you, right? And
Yes, yes.
they want to
The
find out
dual
more.
footprints that Emily has mentioned, we did that as a podcast episode, but that is based off of a blog series, a 7-part blog series that I wrote on mentoring and how to mentor people, which this would be a good point to mention, folks, that I do write a weekly blog. It gets posted on my website, which that's in the show notes on Mondays. And then I repost that on Wednesdays on my LinkedIn profile, and then also on my Facebook business page, Fire Officer Leadership Academy. And for firefighters that are listening out there, I do have a group that's specifically for firefighters or retired firefighters. And it doesn't matter whether you're a volunteer firefighter, a career firefighter, military firefighter, wildland firefighter, or an industrial firefighter. And it's called the Firefighters Leadership Network. And if you're listening and you're interested in joining, look it up. However, if you're trying to sell something, I'm going to cut you out of that group. This is for leadership only. So Emily, what
Yeah.
are some of those other ones?
And then the other ones we discussed were team building, organizational culture, and organizational monsters.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of our favorites.
Yep. And disunity in the community and unity in the community.
Yeah, folks, and that one
The
right
real tongue
there,
twister one.
yeah, disunity in the community. We talked about the Gettysburg Campaign of 1863, and
Mhm.
then the ensuing battle at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and what happened between 2 Civil War generals, Meade and Sickles, and the issues that that created. Hence, disunity in the community. And then unity in the community, which was one of our last episodes for 2024. We talked about the opposite of that. So, disunity in the community, what type of problems are created within a team when there is team disunity, and what positive aspects come out of teamwork. That was a unity in the community. And so at this point, we received an updated email from Buzzsprout, which that's where our software lies, and we take care of that when it gets posted. For statistics, and interestingly enough, we live, oh, I don't know, about 45 minutes to an hour north of Denver,
Yeah.
depending on the traffic. And so most of our listeners were in the Denver area, but also up here in the Fort Collins, Loveland, Johnstown area. And then the next leading city was Omaha, Nebraska. And we had people not only from the United States, various parts of the United States. Those cities that I just mentioned were the leading ones, but we've had people from Sweden, Thailand, Canada, and the United
Wow.
Kingdom. Yeah, tune in and listen. Which that kind of lines up
That's cool.
with my book when we did the
Mhm.
campaign. The international bestseller actually it turned into international bestseller because I
Yeah.
had people purchasing my book from the United Kingdom, from Germany, Mexico, Australia, and New Zealand. So it's interesting to see some of these countries line up. Buzzsprout also listed our top episodes from last year was episode number 1, our introduction and why leadership, and episode 2, integrity, trust, and credibility. Leader's intent and D-Day, June 6, 1944 was another leader. And here a few moments ago, we talked about managing people's bad for morale. That was one of our top episodes.
Mm.
Last year, General Al Gray retired from the Marine Corps. He passed away, and we did an episode on that called An Example of a Great Leader. That also was one of the top episodes for 2024. So, folks, that's our rundown
Yeah.
right now for episode 1. Emily and I wanted to go back and we wanted to recap 2024, and we wanted to let people know who your first time, why we do this, and then also remind those who are listening that may have forgotten.
So do you think we have a teaser for what season 2 is going to look like, or are we just going to keep picking up where we left off?
Well, Emily and I have discussed the potential for bringing on guests, and we've not finalized that. If we do move down that path, we would not do it every episode. Most likely, it would be every other episode. And that's related to the fact that it could be difficult finding a guest. And I don't want to bring somebody on as a guest unless I have vetted them and I
Yeah.
find out, what their background is. I did receive an email from an individual that I never heard from before who said, "Hey, I would like to be a guest on your podcast." I have several people, probably close to between 10 and 12 people that I would reach out to. I know their background, I know their leadership philosophies, and listen, I'm not going to bring somebody on who is woke. Okay. We've had enough of that garbage.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm certainly not
Doesn't
going to
go with their
bring,
philosophy.
yeah, we don't agree with their philosophy. So I'm not going to have anybody who's woke, as a guest on our podcast. But also as a teaser coming up the next 2 episodes as we move into 2025, we're going to be talking about reflecting on 2024
Mm.
and then moving into 2025 and how you can take that from that reflection of 2024 and build for 2025 and develop some goals for yourself. So, Emily, that's it
That sounds
for
great.
our first episode of 2025. Do you have anything that you'd like to add before we close this out?
No, I've just enjoyed getting to do this podcast with you, and I look forward to season 2. And thank you to all our listeners for following us.
Yes.
And Happy New Year.
Yes. And folks, Emily and I, we have an outline that just keeps us on target, but we don't have a script. This is not scripted.
No.
And Emily and I love doing this podcast together. We've received comments from other people said, "Hey, we could tell that you and Emily really enjoy doing this with each other." Yeah. And that's absolutely the truth. So
It's true. It's almost like we're sitting down at a coffee shop
yeah,
together
it is.
talking.
It is. And hey, people, I've been taking both my daughters out on dates ever since they were little babies. And for those of you who are fathers and you have daughters, I'll add this in. You better be doing the same thing because there's a lot of dirt balls that are running around out there. Okay. And maybe in an upcoming podcast, we can talk about that, fathers and daughters. So, folks,
Yeah.
if you found this episode useful, you like it, then please like and subscribe, share it. You're going to find our podcast out there, and also in Buzzsprout, but iHeartRadio, Apple, and Spotify. My website, www.fireofficerleadership.academy, is in the show notes. You can learn more about the services that I have to offer, and you'll also find my weekly blog. And echoing what Emily just said, thank you for those who have listened. Thank you for your feedback. We appreciate that. And so then we will see you on the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.